Coming to yet another Dreamer Futures think tank on a kind of a sleepy, beautiful Friday in early June on the KU campus. I imagine you can tell that there aren't very many of us out there on the sidewalks today or anywhere else. And, well, they are somewhere in their offices. There's Dave Eckert, who's director of the Gerontology Center. He's always in his office somewhere doing something or another, and has come almost every time to one of these think tanks. Today, we are very lucky to have Donna Butts from Generations United, Washington, D.C., and we are streaming live today again. And so there are a number of people out there in the audience who are sort of voices at the top of the stairs here in a certain sense. They're here but not here. And we're glad that we can reach out to lots of people who can't make it today, but thanks a lot for making the effort. Donna is a native Kansan. She was born in Topeka, and she had the brains to leave town when she was 2. Anyway, but her grandfather lived there until he died, Grandpa Butts, and she often visited Kansas and Topeka to visit him. And he was an extraordinary person. As you know, grandparents are extraordinarily important to the family structure, if it's together at all. He's the kind of guy, she told me this morning, that he got his 4th hole-in-one when he was 82. His 4th. Wow. And he never owned a car, and he always walked around Topeka. So she walked around a lot with Grandpa Butts. And Topeka and Kansas remained a kind of warm spot in her heart. She's a very widely traveled person, has been working with issues on aging and intergenerational living for the last 17 years at least as the executive director of Generations United. And before that, she had worked for nonprofits all of her life, got an undergraduate degree, Marylhurst College. And what was that in?
Communications.
Communications, which would be pretty important. Then later a master's degree, a master's certificate in nonprofits at Stanford, and worked with youth for a very long time, the YMCA, etc. And 97 went to Generations United. And that is a fairly small nonprofit organization. It's also an NGO. She works internationally, has a staff of about 8 people, and has been really the great umbrella resource for this whole idea that if we want a true human ecology, we have to live with people of all ages. We can't just segregate out by age groups. And I think that what we're finding in our own studies, which maybe we'll share a little bit in our conversation, is that lots of people are no longer interested in just being with rich white people over in the corner, set aside from everybody else. All, as some people call it, the geezer ghettos. That's not what we're about. And so the Generations United does programming and policy and gives information and does work all around the world, but particularly in the United States. And Donna Butts is here to talk to us today on the title, Intergenerational Communities, Unleashing the Potential of All Ages. So would you welcome Donna, and thanks so much for coming all the way from DC.
Thank you, Dennis. That was a wonderful introduction. I had this vision of me at 2.5 on the side of the road with my thumb out when I was leaving Kansas. But my family actually flew out. I had an aunt back in the 50s who was a flight attendant, and so when my family decided to move to Oregon, we flew from Topeka to Portland. And that was when planes weren't pressurized. And so one of the jobs of the flight attendant was to walk around and pass out gum so you could chew gum and your ears would pop. So my aunt thought it would be great to have me at 2.5 and my sister at 4 or 5 be the ones to pass out the gum. And we were very efficient about it. We passed it out, and if somebody was asleep, we just stuck it in their mouth. We had a wonderful trip when we were coming west. But it was always a joy and a pleasure to come back here to Kansas and to see my grandpa and to see the sunflowers and the things that were very close to my family. So I'm delighted to be here today, and I very much appreciate the invitation, Dennis. I've had a wonderful time learning a little bit more about some of the plans and some of the work that's underway here, and I think it's just fabulous. I'm so glad to be aware of it, because I think there's so much that we can share and that can be learned from what you have begun here. But I'm going to talk today about intergenerational practices, but I wanted to start with a story, because it's always kind of nice to start with a story. So I don't know if anybody here, has anybody here ever been to Bhutan? Anybody heard of Bhutan? Okay, so you've heard of it. Okay, Bhutan is a tiny country that's between India and Nepal, up in that region. And it's absolutely gorgeous and it's pristine. And they're the country that are best known for having set up an incredible matrix for how to measure gross national happiness. So GNH, there are signs everywhere that say GNH is more important than GDP. And they have an incredible matrix for measuring happiness. But part of what they do is the environment is incredibly important to them, so they do a lot to protect it. And one of the ways that they protect the environment, there are more seats. One of the ways
these are all Methodists. Come on up. They all sit at the back.
One of the ways that they protect the environment and protect their country is that they only allow a certain number of people into Bhutan. And in order to get into Bhutan, you have to pay in advance. And you have to pay, it's something, at that point it was like $230 a day. And that would cover your room, your guide, your transportation, your food, things like that. But you had to be able to pay in advance, and usually you'd be staying for more than a couple of days. So, you can imagine the demographic that usually is able to go and it appeals to is usually an older, a little bit more affluent population. So when we went a couple of years ago, and this is a picture up with the Himalayas in the background, and this is our guide, Pema, and he's in traditional Bhutanese dress, and then that's me and my husband, and we had some other friends that were off trekking, so it was a wonderful time. As Pema relaxed and got to know us better, the stories we heard were just incredible about the culture, about growing up, and about the rich history in Bhutan. And one thing he told us one day, as we were talking about gross national happiness, he said, yes, well, it's very important here, but we would be much happier if people would stop asking us how happy we are. Because they run around and they survey people constantly, and they'll go into remote villages and survey, are you happy? And they're like, yeah, we're happy, leave us alone, and we'll be even happier. But as we also went along, he said, Donna, one day my little brother came up to me, and he said, Pema, are there any young people that live outside of Bhutan? Are there any young people that live outside of Bhutan? Because think about it, the tourists, the outsiders that came in were generally older. So they hadn't really seen any young people except for Bhutanese who were young. So when you think about what we're doing and what we've done in this country, when we segregate people artificially by age, you can see that it'd be very easy for somebody living in a 60 plus only community to say, are there any young people? And children in school or daycare centers to say, are there any older people? It's really healthier when we mix and integrate the ages, when we have the opportunity to learn together, to benefit from the wisdom, to benefit from the new ideas, and to connect. We don't want to be like Pema's brother and say, are there any young people or are there any old people here? So today, what I want to do is talk with you about a few things. One of the reasons why I believe that it's really healthy for generations to intermingle is that what I say is when we have an older adult gated community, oftentimes the conversation only goes to the 3 Ps, pain, pills, and passing. What hurts, what medication you're on, and who died. And a lot of times when we have younger people who are by themselves, they talk about the 3 Ts, which have actually moved on by a couple of generations now, but what I used to say is the 3 Ts, Twitter, Twilight, and texting. Then it went to tributes. But now, as we have our new rush of interns, I'm going to be updating my Ts. They'll probably become something else. But when you think about it, we need to mix the Ps and the Ts. We need to make sure that we have conversations that go beyond just what we'd be talking about with our own age groups. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution in intergenerational practices, some of what we've identified as best practices around the country and around the world, best intergenerational communities, what you might consider doing as you're involved in some of the incredible work that's happening along the I-70 corridor. that really can help to unleash the potential of all ages. So does it sound like a plan? Okay. Well, I always think it's best to start with a little activity. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And what I'm going to ask you to do now, I'll explain this slide to you just because I think it's very fun. And John, you might like this. This is a picture from a place called Kojian, which is outside of Tokyo. And it's an intergenerational adult care facility and child care center. And it's one of the oldest in Japan. And every morning, the children go out and the older adults lead them in exercise. And I never could figure out why the children all didn't have shirts on and orange hats on, but that they exercised. And as soon as the exercise class was over, they would run and they'd sit in the laps of the older people. They'd talk about what their days were going to be like, and then they'd all go about their business. But it was a great way to start the day. And then what I loved about them is at the end of the day, they noticed that the children would start getting nervous as other children were being picked up and they weren't. So the older adults decided to design a program so as the day was winding down, they would go down and read to the children and keep them cuddled and distracted so that they didn't notice that they were the last one being picked up. So it really worked well as far as the purpose and intent for that day. So what I'd like you to do, if you're game, is I want you to come up here and join me. It's going to be a little interactive to get you started. So you can put your things down. If there's a reason you can't, it's okay to sit in your seat, but anybody who can, I want you up here. And what we're going to do, good. Thank you. And if you're watching this by live stream, just stand up and act like you have somebody older and younger near you. Okay, what you're going to do is this is called an age line. And what I want you to do is we're going to start here with whoever thinks they're the youngest person, and we're going to end here with whoever thinks they're the oldest. Now, the trick is you cannot say anything. You can't say, I'm X, I'm Y. You can't say anything. You have to do it all with your eyes. No elbows, sounds like, add for. No, you just have to start. So this is going to be our youngest here and our oldest next to that pillar. No talking.
No talking.
No talking. And it's okay if you have to wrap around. We might end up with. Okay, so we have our youngest. Okay, it's going to be a line, so don't stand in front of somebody. Our youngest, and let's make sure you can see everybody. The youngest, can you see? Youngest? And we're aging a little bit. Everybody okay? No talking.
I'm just saying get in line.
Okay, so everybody's in line. Everybody's fine? Okay, good. All right, so that's good. Okay, great. Thank you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start with our youngest, and you're going to say your name and your age. And if you happen to be at the wrong place in the line, then you're going to shift. Okay? So we're going to start down here. And be loud. So.
I'm Alex and I'm 20.
I'm Wendy and I'm 32.
I'm Erin and I'm 27.
I'm Brenna and I'm 33.
I'm David and I'm 80.
Would you like to come down here?
Come down here. Come down here with the good old.
I'm Emily and I'm 29.
I'm Matt and I'm 31.
I'm Clarissa and I'm 27.
I'm Christy and I'm 35.
Get close because it's got a long line down here. And you're what?
35.
35.
Stefan, 35.
35, great. Okay, squeeze
Dan,
down.
46. Andy, 41.
John, 51.
Lisa, 50.
Tamara, 60.
Glenn, 65.
Dave, 64.
Angela, 65.
Michael, 67.
Diane, 67.
Jim, 72.
Dennis, 69.
Bob, 73.
I'm still 80.
Forrest, 83.
Hey, good.
Mary, 68.
Okay.
Joellen, 71.
Ellen, 77.
And I didn't do that. I'm Donna, 58, so here. Okay, good. Great. You folks did pretty good. Excellent. So let's talk about this a little bit. It's a great exercise because one of the things that's always so taboo is to talk about your age.
Turn it around this way so we can.
Okay? Yeah, so you want us to come on
Like
down
this,
so everybody can
so we
see?
see each other. And
Okay?
all
All
our
right.
beautiful faces when we talk. Come on here, Forrest, because you're the grandpa and grandpa.
So let's start.
I'm really happy he's here today.
Come on a little bit more.
Got it?
Good.
Okay, so let's start. Let's take this by decade. So what's the best thing about being in your 20s? Anything. What's the best thing about being in your 20s?
You're not
Sex,
30 yet?
drugs.
What?
You're not 30?
You're not 30 yet. Okay, what's the best thing about being in your 50s?
Independence.
Independence. What's the best thing about being in your 80s?
Sex.
Sex. What's the best, something for the 20-year-olds to look forward to? What's the best thing about being in your 30s?
Not being in your 20s.
Not being in what about your 60s?
The wisdom of hindsight and freedom to do what you want to do.
And 40s?
I'd say the same thing. I'd say wisdom and the energy to do something about it.
70s?
Not really caring about what other people think.
I mean, that freedom. That's great. Good. Now, we're here today to talk about communities, about where you live. So what's the most important thing to you in terms of where you think about where you want to live when you're in your 60s?
Being able to walk downtown.
Walk downtown? Okay, great. What about when you're in 20s? What's the most important thing about where you live?
Being able to walk downtown.
And your 40s?
Having a place where children can play.
Children can play. And what about 80s?
Having a place for grandchildren.
Having a place for grandchildren to play. And 40s? Did I say 40s yet?
40s, yeah.
30s? Did I do 30s? 30s. What's the best thing about what's most important to you when you think about community?
Knowing your neighbors.
Yeah.
Knowing your
Not
neighbors.
needing to go downtown.
Good. You can do this exercise I've done this with 500 people, I've done it with 10. And you can do it in a number of different settings. Somebody liked it so much that they decided when they did a bridal shower, they did it about love. What's the most important thing about love when you're 80? What's the most important thing about love when you're 20, when you're 30? I've done it with housing developers on what's the most important thing in a development when you're a certain age. You can do it around workforce. You can do it around a number of issues. But really what we all learn is that you're every age you've ever been. You take that with you. And we have more in common than we do separates us. So thank you.
Thanks.
So at least I got you up and moving once, so that'll keep you awake a little bit longer. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit of history about Generations United. We were founded almost 30 years ago, and we were founded at a time when people were really trying to pit the generations against each other. And this is the cover photo from a journal back in 1987 when we were founded. And what you see is a younger person and an older person in battle fatigues. They each have a gun, they're back to back, and basically the message is, march 10 paces, turn and shoot. Whoever's left gets our scarce resources, because our country can't possibly take care of our most valuable and vulnerable generations, our older and our younger generations, the generations that I call our bookend generations, that hold civil society together. So our founders, which were the Children's Defense Fund, AARP, the Child Welfare League of America, and the National Council on Aging, came together and organized Generations United. And it's as one of our founders said, we formed Generations United to argue for a caring society, for a society that cared about all of its people and all of its populations. And our mission continues to be to improve the lives of children, youth, and older adults through intergenerational programs and public policies for the enduring value of all. And as Thomas Jefferson did or didn't say, because there's controversy about this, but I still like the quote, the web of mutual obligations between generations is essential for a civilized society. We are interdependent and we need each other, and it beats the alternative. And if you can see that, what it is Joe, the gated individual. It beats the alternative of us gating ourselves off. And at Generations United, we advocate for an ungated life, for one that really is connected to other generations. And we do it because we really believe in the social compact and the importance of the giving and receiving of resources across the lifespan. Because when you think about it, when you're born, you need support. You get more independent, so you're contributing more. And there are various times in your life, though, when you need support, when you need a little assistance, when you need a little help. And things go like that throughout life. So it's that social compact that binds us together and keeps our civil society together. So that's one of the reasons I think that intergenerational work is so important. And one of the reasons that I like to do a PowerPoint, and I'm sorry I don't have a lot of charts and graphs, I just don't, but what I have are a lot of pictures from our intergenerational photography contest. So most of these pictures were taken by amateur photographers trying to capture the connection between generations. And we did it for about over 10 years on an international basis, but it's a really wonderful thing you can do in your own community or your own area. It's people trying to capture the intergenerational connections along the I-70 corridor, however you want to do that. But one of the other reasons that I think it's really important is that Ellie Guggenheimer, when she got up to speak at the UN at the International Day of the Older Persons, she was about 82 at the time, and she got up and started her remarks by saying, I have a great deal of interest in this whole senior citizen thing. I have a son who's about to become one. We're living longer, there are more generations, and that's a real wonderful thing in this country. But on the other end of the age spectrum, I always remember the 17-year-old that was on a panel with me once in Minneapolis. And he started his remarks by saying, I've been volunteering since I was 6 months old. And now I drive myself. When he was 6 months old, his mother used to take him to nursing homes so that older adults could hold him. And he grew up in that kind of environment, and so now he drives himself. He still visits, he still does things. They might hold him the same way, but it's that lifelong experience and knowing that it's okay that somebody who is 7 or 70 can be your best friend, because it's a natural, normal type of a thing. But I think somebody who explained it to me very well through some of his words, anybody love Dr. Seuss? And I'm sure we're in a university town, so I'm sure everybody has read this book a million times or given it 12,000 times, but I love it. Oh, the places you'll go? And if you remember right, in that book, it's all about the places you'll go, the things you'll see, the adventures you'll have, the life you'll lead. It's all out there waiting for you. And then you'll get to that most dreaded place, that awful place, the waiting place. And you'll wait, and you'll wait, and you'll wait. And when you think about it, when we first created adolescence back at the beginning of the last century, we created it and it became a waiting place. You're too young to contribute, you're waiting to be. Just be quiet, go to school, just goof off. We just turned it into an unnatural, unwelcome kind of waiting place. And now as we're creating this new time in life where older adults are living much longer and much healthier, we're really in danger of turning that into a waiting place. You're done, you're waiting, you have nothing more to contribute, and now you're just waiting to die. So those waiting places. And we can't, as a country, face all of the complexities that we face if we're not engaging all people of all ages and realizing that everybody in our communities are resources. So one of the things that we did this last year is that we do an annual signature report. And this last time, we did it on one of the reasons, or two of the reasons why I think this work is more and more critically important. And we did a report called Out of Many One, Uniting the Changing Faces of America. And the reason we did it is when you think about it, right now we have a population, people over the age of 65 in our country, 22% are of color. And if you look at people under the age of 5 in our country, over 50% are of color. So if we're segregating people by age, we're also starting to segregate them by race, by ethnicity. And at some point, that's going to intersect, and we're going to have two populations that don't look alike and have never looked in each other's eyes. So why should they care about it? Why should we be making investments in the younger generations? Why should we be making investments in older generations? And Ron Brownstein of the National Journal said, we have now turned onto the road of sustained competition between brown and gray. And I disagree with that. I think we have another narrative, another way of approaching that. I think we turn competition into cooperation, we turn competition into collaboration, and we turn competition into community. And that's where we can really intersect and make a difference. And if we do that, I think it sounds as beautiful as this, one of my favorite Super Bowl commercials from this year. if we can make it play. We got it to play earlier.
Let's see.
So we had to have something that clicked.
Let's see.
You might have to use the mouse.
The mouse, I
mouse?
think.
Okay,
It's right here.
it's right there, okay.
I don't know why it's not coming up, some quirk.
There,
we
you
go.
just have to click on the button.
There we go.
Beautiful for spacious skies.
Por tus olas de grano saber, yo piscina sakuti sa ibabaw ng mga brutas. America, America, God shed His grace on thee. Orba hichere sa tajtire, chadula mera merbria. Bevat to verjachtir tach from sea to shining sea.
Did anybody see that commercial that was on? Does anybody know that there was a little bit of controversy about it?
No, real.
It was very, very interesting because I think it's absolutely beautiful. I can't watch it when I show it because I'll start crying. But it erupted a lot of controversy from people who said, what an insult that you would sing our national anthem in anything but English. Not acknowledging that we have a number of other languages in the country. And I think what that shows so well is how they blend and make beautiful, beautiful harmony. I actually did a blog for New America about that, just teeing off of the commercial and what it meant in terms of how we can sing in harmony and what it means in our country. So I think that to me really illustrates the changing face of America. And the reason that we did the report that we did is, again, we believe that we have more that connects us and separates us. And what we really need to look at in this country is that our demographic diversity, both as we age and as we become more colorful in this country, is our country's greatest asset. And we need to realize that we're age advantaged. We're age advantaged because we have a younger population that's coming up, and you look around the world at other countries that don't have that younger population, and we're age advantaged because we have this incredibly educated, rich, healthy, older adult population that we haven't yet figured out how to make sure that we engage. So a little bit of history as we talk about the evolution and intergenerational work in this country. The first programs were really started back in the 60s as part of the War on Poverty. Sergeant Shriver, when they were working on the War on Poverty, started a program called Foster Grandparents. And I know we have somebody from Foster Grandparents here, but those were the early programs because one of the reasons Foster Grandparent was started was because they noticed that we had an aging population that was poor and that was isolated. And they were worried about making sure that they could stay connected. And so Foster Grandparents started as a program where I remember foster grandparents rocking babies in daycare centers and things like that. It was very, a wonderful way. They would get a stipend, they'd get a health exam once a year, they would be connected to other people. So the focus really in the early days was on connecting. But they also then became viewed as sort of sweet and nice and optional, not really critical to what was going on in programs and in communities. So they started then to move more to contribution. Each generation has something to contribute, something to give to their community and to another generation. And what we found is it became more not about rocking the babies as older adults who wanted to rock the boat. So things started to change a little bit. And as it's moved, we've also tried to move the conversation from burden to benefit when you think about it. How often do you hear the discussion about the fact that America is aging and people talk about the burden? And I met in the fall with the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and I was the only person on this 4-person panel that wasn't talking about how much it was going to cost our country, but I said what we're going to lose in human capital asset if we don't mobilize this population far exceeds what we're talking about spending. And one of the pieces that I wrote recently, I was trying to think, okay, what we have to do is really try to figure out how do we talk about this human capital asset so it makes sense to people. So if you realize that there are 72 million boomers, And it's been said that among older adults, on average, they watch an average of 42 hours of television a week. And if a volunteer hour is valued at over $20 an hour, and so if you took 10% of those boomers who gave up 10% of the time that they spend watching television, that would work out to about $800 million a year. And that's a really conservative estimate, but if we start to think about, as a country and as the Federal Reserve, they would never let $800 million sit dormant on some shelf and not be engaged and not be an active part of what keeps our country strong. So we have to be talking and framing things in a way that really makes sense to people. So now we're starting to see that movement, or we have for several years, the movement from contribution to community, to not just a single program, but a community-wide commitment towards engaging and making sure that each generation is valued. And one of the reasons I wanted to use this picture is we've done some work with some messaging experts, and one of the things they do oftentimes is they'll bring out magazines, and people will rip out pictures of what they want their future to look like. And this picture, in all of the collages, was like the #1 picture around the country. And what you see is older people who are enjoying a cup of coffee together. It's clear that they've been working in this community garden, and they've been working with people of all ages, building this community garden. And they're having a break and they're laughing. So what it tells you is a couple things, is that people want to be engaged with other generations. They want to have that camaraderie of people their own age, and they want to have a purpose, but we also want to have fun. We want to be able to laugh. So this really conveys a lot of what is important in communities. And it's all about unleashing the power when we don't artificially segregate people by age. And I think this is a really good example of it. This is an 82-year-old who leads a teenage exercise class. And she is seems to be doing fine. The kids are like, but she's doing fine. So it's unleashing that power, because when it comes to the end of the day, we all need to feel like we have purpose. And I think Mr. Rogers captured it well when he said, whether we're a preschooler or a young teen, a graduating college senior or a retired person, we human beings all want to know that we're acceptable, that our being alive somehow makes the difference in the lives of others. We want to make sure that us getting out of bed every day makes a difference, that there's a purpose for that. And I was reminded of that when I was thinking about my first intergenerational program, which was back when I was a team director in my early 20s in Salem, Oregon at the YWCA. And when I started there, there was an intergenerational program that was one of the first ones that was funded by then the Administration on Aging. And it basically took teenagers from sociology classes in high school to visit low-income older adults who were isolated in their own homes, but they were still living without many people around them. And I thought, okay, the funding's ending. If we have to cut this program, we'll cut it. And then I went on my first visit, and what I found were teenagers that skipped school except for the day that they were going to see their senior, and older adults that didn't get out of bed except for the day that their young person was coming, because they both had purpose. They both had a reason to get up, to be present, and to be there. So it was just really startling. And we were able to find funding. We kept the program going, which I was really, really pleased with. So basically, with intergenerational programs now, we talk about 4 types of programs. And you'll see in a second, it has to do with sort of the direction of service. And so there are young serving old, old serving young, young and old serving together, and young and old together under one roof, whether it's an adult daycare center with a child care center or a multi-generational center. So let me talk about some examples. They're generally, as I said, based on the direction of service, is how they've been classified in the past. So let's talk about young serving old. Anybody have any ideas about what a program might look like where a young person is serving an older person? Or maybe you're familiar with one here in Kansas or Missouri?
Just going to visit senior centers and school kids.
So friendly visit, going to visit,
Senior centers have servers who are young people for meals.
So young people serving meals in the senior centers. Okay. There's also a huge effort in young people teaching older adults technology. ARP has a whole Mentor Up program, and we actually have 20 youth grantees around the country that are starting programs teaching older adults how to use technology. I know I breathed a sigh of relief when Brianna came in and took over for me. But it's teaching technology. But there are other things, and I love this story. if you don't mind. There is, in Florida, in Manatee County, there was a 12-year-old. Her name was Laura Lockwood. And Laura really wanted to serve Meals on Wheels. She wanted to serve older adults. So she went down to the Meals on Wheels office, and she said, I'm here, I'm ready to serve. And they said, you're too young, you can't do it. And she said, but I can help. Think about it. I could drive around, I could be the passenger, I could run out, drop the meal off, run back, we could do it much faster, much more effectively. Let me do it. And they said, no, you're too young, you can't do it. So finally she said, okay. So she left, and she went and started Manatee, which is now the largest community-based teen volunteer program in the country. And they mobilize thousands of teenagers. They deliver Meals on Wheels. They take pets to low-income to isolated seniors. They organize nosy neighbor barbecues so that older adults meet each other, the people in the community meet each other, so they look out for each other. They do home inspections. They do a number of programs, and Laura's now about 30. But that program and the fact that, no, you're 12 years old, you can't possibly do anything, can't possibly have anything to contribute, it just isn't true. So young serving old, there's some great models of that. And then when we get to older adults serving younger people, any ideas or know some models in this area where older adults are helping younger people, helping children?
Tutoring, reading programs.
Tutoring, mentoring, right? There's tutoring, there's mentoring. There's also some really interesting ones that are sometimes get a little out of the box. There was a gentleman in Wisconsin who had a 6th grade education, and when he retired and his wife passed away, he said, I don't have anything to give back. And I think it was the foster grandparent person, said, well, hold it, no, I think you really do. I think there's something you could do. So he said, well, what can I do? What can I do? He said, well, you're a woodworker. So what he ended up doing was he set up a woodworking shop in the juvenile detention facility and started teaching the young offenders how to make things he recruited all of his friends, his older friends, and now they work with young people, they create things, they learn things, and they do that side by side. So it also reminds me of warm lines, and there used to be one called Grandma Please in Chicago. Because some people say, oh, I don't have the ability to do anything. Well, what Grandma Please was, it was homebound older adults who, when a kid came home from school, was a latchkey kid, they would call this line and they would be talking to this older adult. So they were there for them after school. They couldn't get out of their house, but they could be on the phone, or they could use technology, and they could communicate and be there. In Kansas, in Chanute, is that right? Thank you. Chanute, there's a program, it's a school greeters program. And what they do there is every Monday, older adults in the community go to the school, and they greet the children who are coming back to school that week. Hi, how are you? Hope you have a great day. It's going to be wonderful. Welcome. Come on in. And when we talked to some of the volunteers in that program, they said they realized it's the first nice thing that kids heard all day. And it's sort of that nice beginning, that bright beginning to their day. So they welcome all the children into school, and then they go in the cafeteria and they have coffee together, and then they go about their day. So it's a simple, simple program. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it touches somebody. It touches somebody. So there's those. Then there's young and old serving together. Anybody have any ideas about some of those kind of models? Young and old serving together? Sometimes, this is my favorite, sometimes it's like more of a stretch. But I think one of the programs, I think this is an absolutely incredible, I think it was in Wisconsin. And anybody, I don't know if you've ever done this, have you ever had somebody in your life that had to learn how to drive? And the driver's education required that you had to drive around for so long and get so many meals or so many miles on your car. And there was this mother and daughter that were driving around, and they were talking about this because gas prices were high, and they were like, this is so ridiculous. We're driving around. And they started talking about, well, what if? And they said, well, what if? What if? That what if led to a visit to the Meals on Wheels program and a discussion about what if. And that what if became Driving Away Hunger that merged driver's education with delivering Meals on Wheels. And it's something you would never think about because we think driver education's here, Meals on Wheels are over here. But you think about it, it became a win-win-win-win because the older adults were getting their meals and they were getting some attention from a younger person. The younger person was getting the miles, they were learning about service, and the parents were getting a write-off on their mileage because it was volunteer work. So there's just those kinds of things when we think outside the box, when we challenge some of those ways that we traditionally look at things, that can make such a difference. But with young serving old, it can also be community dialogues, when you have an issue in your community and you pull people together to think about how you're going to address it, to make sure that all generations are represented in those dialogues about how to address it. There's neighborhood watch programs where older adults and young people together walk and monitor a neighborhood. And then there's younger and older under one roof. Any ideas on younger and older under one roof? There could be, for example, a child care center that's co-located with an adult daycare center. It could be a senior center that is embedded in a high school. And I was mentioning this at dinner last night. My favorite example of that is in Swampscott, Massachusetts, where they were faced about several years ago with needing to replace a 100-year-old senior center or a 100-year-old high school. And normally in communities, oftentimes you see them kind of face off and fight it out. And what that city council was able to do was say, hold it, no, what can we do together? And so they pooled their resources. And several years ago, the Swampscott High School and Senior Center opened. And they were able to build a bigger facility, a green building that is used, and it's wonderful. The day that I visited, I walked through the gym area, and there were young men who were putting on their basketball shoes next to older women who were putting on their tap shoes, because they were going to play basketball and they were going to practice for their tap recital. And they were just, hi, how's your day? Oh, good, yeah, we're doing good. And they'd go off. They had a gym that was much bigger than they could have built alone, and they had older adults that would walk the track while young people were doing whatever in the middle and vice versa. When the budget was cut back and they were going to need to close the library 2 days a week, the older adults came forward and said, train us, teach us, we can keep it open. So they staff the library 2 days a week now, and it's absolutely natural for them to be taking care of it. But would they have driven across town? Would they have thought they were their kids or their school if they hadn't been a part of it? Chances are not. So it's how we use resources to connect generations rather than separate them, or as we oftentimes say, it's saving dollars while making sense. Just saving dollars while making sense. So in general, too, one thing that's important to remember about intergenerational work is that some people will sometimes say, oh, I'm doing intergenerational work. And it may be that they're taking kids over to a nursing home to sing when somebody turns 100. But we don't think that that's a very intense level of engagement. And so Matt Kaplan out of Penn State University has started to develop this level of engagement range. And it ranges, as he says, what he's working with is level 1 to 7, where it's just learning about each other, maybe occasionally saying hello, maybe occasionally having activities, maybe having longer activities ongoing, all the way down to intergenerational community. But it's really understanding that intergenerational practices are very, they need to be planned, they need to be thoughtful, they need to be intentional, and they need to be evaluated as you go along. And really understanding the difference between what is a multi-generational experience and an intergenerational experience. Because somebody may have a multi-generational space where they have people of various generations, but if they don't intentionally work on how they intergenerationalize it, it'll stay multi-generational. So it's going from multi to inter. And it's also understanding in a community how it's an economy of scope, how a single intervention can touch multiple generations and lives and ages. And it really requires that we all use an intergenerational lens. I can't look at any opportunity, any situation, without thinking about what's here that older people can do, what can younger people do, how can we look at this and try to solve this using that intergenerational lens. So what we do at Generations United to try to support this work is we have programs of distinction, and we have about 16 around the country that have been able to receive that designation. But what we try to do is help people understand what the elements are. And there's a number of examples that I can give, from university-based programs to community-based to foster care programs that actually, for example, the County of San Diego has a program where foster youth can apprentice for 3 months. They get an older adult volunteer and they learn work habits. The older adult will make sure they got out of bed, they go to work at the county. At the end of the 3 months, they can actually get a job at the county. So it's looking at, again, that connection. We also do profiles of programs. One of them is Meal Runners, similar to the one I talked about, Driving Away Hunger, where they've realized that if they have young people who are helping to pack up the meals and deliver the meals, they can do it much more quickly. So we try to share the stories, the profiles. We also do Youth Jumpstart grants. Right now, AARP has funded us to do that. And this is Kari and his 92-year-old mentor at an event that we did last year. And what Kari's project was, this is in Washington, D.C., and what Kari did was he found his 92-year-old mentor, and what his mentor had done is spent most of his life trying to document the first freed slave burial ground in D.C. And as he reached his 90s, he was worried that nobody was going to carry that work on, and that's when Kari, at age 17, came in and organized his friends, and they said, we'll take it on. So they've been carrying on the work of documenting that program. And then there's a Sean in Florida who started a visitation technology training program in his high school in Florida, and that's now grown to be countywide in Florida. And a lot of technology programs, as I mentioned. Then we do Best Intergenerational Community Awards. And this is when, as I talked, when we try to go from just isolated programs to community approaches. We now have 17 communities who've been designated as Best Intergenerational Communities. We're now getting ready to go into our 4th year of those awards. And it's got a pretty stringent criteria for communities. It began in 2012, and we do a recognition on Capitol Hill, and the communities get a flag or a sign as you come in, best community. And it really honors the fact that it's not a single program, it's an intentional community-wide activity. So I have another video that we'll see if I can get started with of one of our communities.
Just click it. There you go.
Okay. See, I'll figure this out eventually, right? At least I got it. There.
Montgomery County is a great place to live for all ages. That's what representatives from MetLife and Generations United say, and Montgomery County was recognized for that designation at an award ceremony in Washington, D.C.
Honoring the recipients of the 2013 Generations United MetLife Foundation America's Best Intergenerational Communities Award.
Yeah, it recognizes decades of work in the county to build a great quality of life for young people and seniors. There's a lot of nonprofits that the county supports that directly bring seniors into classrooms to do tutoring and language skills. In our planning, we try to prioritize walkable development so that seniors and young people can live independent lifestyles. There's so many ways in which we want Montgomery County to be a community for a lifetime, and that's what this award is all about.
Montgomery was one of 4 communities selected for the award. Chosen for recognizing the value of promoting strong bonds between generations, the county has been a trailblazer in advocating for seniors and intergenerational programs. 30 years ago, an intergenerational committee was formed to plan for a system where young and old could live together.
We started a long time ago. In fact, I guess we're the 2nd oldest center in the country. And it's very nice to be recognized nationally, but the real satisfaction comes from the dailiness of seeing young people benefit from contact with older people and the reverse. And it's just a joy to see the projects that we do.
Thanks for busting me out as a granddad. Appreciate that.
Author and journalist Juan Williams presented the awards, and Congressman Chris Van Hollen was among the representatives for the county. He said Montgomery has excelled in providing intergenerational programs and practices.
I'm really pleased that Montgomery County, the county that I have the great privilege of representing, has really been so far ahead of the game.
Montgomery County has been one of the pioneers behind the idea of what we call intergenerational support, cooperation, the idea that we have these 2 great resources. We've got our young kids who are our future, but we also have lots of experienced people who are getting older and have a whole lot to contribute to our community and to our kids.
We have a program where we take young people into the senior facilities. It's bringing the community into the senior facility, and the smiles on the faces of people when they see, the elementary school kids come and have activities together. It's joyous.
So one of the things I think you heard them say is how long they've been at it, and how much and how dedicated they've been towards making sure that they turn it into an intergenerational community. So that commitment over time really, really matters. Now, I think the next speaker you're going to have is actually from one of the communities that we recognize, Georgetown, Texas. And the way I always talk about them when I describe them is to going from Sun City to Soul City, because they have done a wonderful job of making sure that they integrate the community to the point that they were the only school district in their part of Texas that passed a school bond. Because, again, it was their kids, their community. And we saw that again this year in a community we recognized called Shorewood Village in Wisconsin. For 100 years, they've had an intergenerational charter, and they pass their school bond regularly because it's their community and their kids. Another one is San Diego. San Diego County, for over 10 years, has made a commitment to being an intergenerational county, and they currently have 5 intergenerational coordinators on their county staff. They each have different regions or different areas that they focus on in San Diego. And one of the things that they've spearheaded are intergenerational Olympics, which I think are really great. So I wanted to show you just a little clip of that, because this is, again, something anybody can do.
The Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista plays host to world-class athletes year-round. Recently, they played host to different types of athletes who learned a little something from each other. Take a look.
When you leave here today, I'm going to check to make sure somebody made a new friend today. We've got a lot of people here.
My name is Ken Lockman. I'm out here at the Intergenerational Games out at the Olympic Training Center.
Just line up by number on this side.
I'll be 80 years old in June. I feel like I'm maybe in the 4th grade, not the 3rd grade. I'm older now. I got Madison and Angel. I would describe them as very eager to do every station. We're on our way now. I feel that this exercise we're doing out here is as good for the seniors as it is for the children. Here we are at the big field. This is where we start all the games. It gives us a chance to interact and keep our young thoughts alive. We're trying to instill to keep fit, to learn good nutrition habits. You stand way back here so you don't get hit. That away. And live a good life and exercise and just be helpful and show a lot of respect for the old people in their lives. Okay, Madison, let's go. Here we go. Oh, boy, that was close. Yeah.
Everyone's having a lot of fun. Even the seniors with the kids too.
Throw it over the fence. Try to keep it in between the cones, but throw it as far as you can. This is the 9th annual game. We weren't able to do it last year because of the lack of facility, but we plan on doing it as often as we can. Whoa, boy. Mystery fruit and veggies.
I know what it is. I've done purple.
I say it's 6. You're really close to that, but it's not.
These are active seniors out here. They didn't just get there by sitting around watching television and doing their Xbox and things like that.
It was really nice because we got to experience some things that I've never done before. I'll be jump roping while you guys do.
Okay. Oh boy, somebody just hit it really good.
Now, there are many intergenerational programs that put older adults and youth together, one that might even be right for you. For more, just go to our website, ctn.org. I'm Michael Russo.
The thing that was hard for me, I went out to San Diego one year and I was in the Olympics, and they had me be an older adult. And I was like, what? But it was an absolutely wonderful experience and something that communities can do and that really promote a healthy lifestyle. So these were our winners this year on Capitol Hill. And I wanted to share this because this was one of our oldest speakers and our youngest speakers. The gentleman on the left, his name is Bob Edward Simon, and 50 years ago he started a community called Reston, R-E-S-10, Reston, Virginia. And he was 99, he's now 100, but he was 99 the day that he joined us. And then Haley is in high school, and she was our youngest speaker that day. So let's talk just for a few minutes about next steps before we get into some back and forth and conversation. But in terms of some of the next steps and how do you really move from silos to solidarity. And I think you folks are so on the right track with your New Cities initiative, with the Campus Village. You've got so many things that are in place that, if embraced, can really, really help people understand that it's not a fight, it's a family. We think in terms of family, we think in terms of community. But in order to do that, everybody has to take a bite. So the partnership aspect is essential. It's really critical that there are community leaders, the university is committed, businesses are committed, the nonprofit world, the faith community, government, families, and everyone else who makes up a part of the community realizes that it's important. And then it's looking at the way that you can create the policies and the practices that value all generations. And so at Generations United, we have a set of principles that we've proposed, and I'm happy to share these as well. So if you feel like you frantically have to take notes. But basically, it's along the lines of make lifetime well-being for all the highest priority. Consider the impact of every action on each generation. Unite rather than divide the generations to have the greatest social and financial impact. Recognize and support every generation's ability to contribute to the well-being of their families and their communities. So it's recognizing everyone. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Lawrence, but then I realized that we're the whole I-5 corridor. So just imagine that says, how can you help not I-5, you're the I-70. So back home in Oregon, I'm going down the I-5 instead of the I-70. So what can you do to help the area be in harmony? And I think one of the messages is to help people understand that mixing it up is the new cool. Mixing it up among generations, among other people, that mixing it up is the new cool. And it's reminding people to always use that intergenerational lens. Actually, even though I do need to tell you this story, this is the New Jersey Intergenerational Network, New Jersey Intergenerational Orchestra. Their oldest member's 92 and their youngest is 7. And they don't always hit the right notes, but they have a great time, and they've played on the steps of the Capitol, they've played all over, and they have a wonderful, wonderful time together. So some of the things that are important to remember as you get started is to form an intergenerational committee early, whether that's an intergenerational task force, like they did in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, or an intergenerational planning committee. Make sure that it's equal and not just token, which a number of areas will have a token youth or a token old person on that group, and you can't do that. It's got to be a real authentic engagement. It can be creating an intergenerational charter, which is what Shorewood did. In Falcon Heights, what they did is the mayor wanted it to be an intergenerational community, so they added one more question to the city questionnaire if you wanted to use a city facility. It said, how many generations are going to be involved in your activity? Philanthropy also has a role to play in that, and I love the example in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Community Foundation, where they added one more question on their application was, are you going to involve more generations? How are you involving older? How are you involving younger? So to apply, you could apply for, say, $5,000 to work with young people, $5,000 to work with older people. If you worked with both, you got 10. So it's some of that incentivizing and putting it in front of people. But it's engaging people now in intergenerational dialogues and what they need and they want their community to look like. And there's the basics in terms of using community space, how it's used, how it's designed, which you folks are the experts in. It's funding using intergenerational language. In San Diego, whenever they issue a notice that funds are available, they say they have intergenerational language and older and younger people are specifically mentioned in it. Because if it's not in your face, you don't do it. They also promote things using pictures of all generations. I recently spoke at what is considered one of the better communities for all ages. And in their advertising, all it was older people on this flyer going, oh, it's going to be so fun. It was all older people. And when I went, the youngest person in the audience was 27 years old. And they were there because they were a caregiver for one of the older adults. And I know the folks are well-intentioned. And I said, well, did you reach out to the high school? Did you talk to the youth groups? Did you? And it was like, no. And I said, well, if I ever come back here, or whoever's here next year, I want to be able to say that the youngest person is at the most 17. So it's thinking about that. It's having the pictures, it's having the intentionality. And what's really important when you think about photographs, and what we try to convey is it's not just pictures of old people and little babies. You want to be able to show people of all ages in your pictures to let people know it really is everyone. So some of the resources I encourage you to check out is we do a weekly free e-newsletter called Generations This Week. Our website, Communities for All Ages website, which is Temple University, Viable Futures Center, which merges a lot of the Communities for All Ages and environmental work. And then also think about some of the training opportunities. And our next conference is in 2015. It's going to be in Hawaii this year. So if you've been wanting to organize a vacation, start thinking about it. But our Japan colleagues, our Singapore colleagues, our Hawaii colleagues, as well as the European colleagues are all helping to organize the conference. So it should be really kind of interesting. It's thinking about existing venues. And one thing that we have done since 2012 is build out around Grandparents' Day, encouraging people and communities to do something grand. We have a website, which is just grandparentsday.org, and turn it into a time of activism, not a time to get, sorry Kansas City, a Hallmark holiday card, but turn it into a time to really engage people across the ages. And one of the things we do is social media, and this was our best, most widely, virally spread meme that we did. And this is Brad Pitt, if you don't recognize him. And basically what he said is, I phoned my grandparents, and my grandfather said, we saw your movie. Which one, I said. He shouted, Betty, what was the name of that movie I didn't like? We can always count on our grandparents to keep us grounded, whether you're Brad Pitt or anybody else. But what we need to remember is what Margaret Mead said, is to, above anything, be age-friendly, all age-friendly. Because she said somehow we have to get older people back close to growing children if we're to restore a sense of community, a knowledge of the past, and a sense of the future. And I love what her daughter, Mary Catherine Bateson, said about the same topic, which is when she said, we're living longer and thinking shorter. We're living longer and thinking shorter. So she's carrying on her mom's work. It's just very, very important for people to be a part of the effort, to think about what you're doing in terms of the vision for the campus village, what can't happen instead of what can. And Albert Einstein said it best when he said, most people see what is and never see what can be. So think about what it is that can be here, and you'll be amazed at what you'll be able to come up with. And I really want to thank Dennis for his leadership, for everything that you're engaged in, and for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. So now that I've been tacking at you for so long, we get to have a chance to have a conversation. Thank you. If I didn't go too long, we have almost a half an hour to have more of a conversation. Yeah.
So, 30 years later, Generations United arises on the suggestion that the generations are going to butt heads with one another and compete for scarce national resources. And we have to make political changes because, well, the obvious implication is that the older generation was gobbling up too much of the social resources. Have we made any progress on that political point, on that narrative that the generations are going to be at war with one another? Have we gotten anywhere?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I feel like it's Groundhog Day, but there's a hope. I always talk about the person that got out of bed in the morning to tell you that the world's going to end tomorrow, because there's a lot of hope in it. And where I get inspired is that what we have found and what we can show now is that the people who think about generational conflict are our politicians and our media, because they're an easy default. It's easy to go to generational conflict. If you go outside, what you find are communities and where people think about family. They think in terms of family. So the more we do to frame things in family, people think, oh, maybe I'm concerned about Social Security, but I want to make sure my grandma gets it, that she needs that. And maybe I'm concerned about the cost of education, but I want my grandchildren to have the education that they need. So it's that family framework that is really helpful. The other is, in some of the work that we've been doing, is what we found is that there are some people who are deeply entrenched in generational conflict language, and they're not going to change. So the key is to leap over the dead-end argument and go where you want to bring people. Because if we stay here talking about generational conflict, we're going to be stuck in this dark hole. But if we can leap over that and really help to put out the vision for what things can look like and what the world can look like, then I think that we can make a difference in that way. And that was kind of an aha to us, because we would always, when something would erupt, we go, oh, now we got to respond to it. And we do it all this rapid response. And it sucks all your energy. But if you can take and you can help to create what the alternative is, I think it matters. Now, when you get down, some people have said, it's great, but at the end of the day, we have a limited budget or a limited pie. Okay. One is we're the wealthiest country, and it's how are we spending our money and what are our values. People, whenever they just put it to it's young versus old, there's a lot of other things that our country spends money on besides our aging population and our children. And so if we're going to have this discussion, then let's have this discussion. And it's going to include everything on the table and not just old people and kids. Because if we let them just have it be about young and old, we get pushed in a corner and we get defensive. So it's helping to realize that it's a much broader discussion. And I think at the end of the day, what people have to realize is it also distracts us from what really has to happen, which is Social Security, for example. Social Security, when it was established, was never meant to be a stagnant program. It was always with the understanding that it would need to be tweaked at different times, and it has been. Back in the 80s, they did some changes. There are some changes that need to be made now, but it's a viable program. But if people say, oh, it's sucking the country dry, when there can be some changes that actually most people agree on what those changes could be that would make it solid for another 40 years. So it's not, there are some things that we need to do. And the other thing that is probably more than you wanted to know, or that I wanted me to talk about, but the other thing I think is really critical when we look at policies is how we're talking about them. Because if we let people frame Social Security as a retirement program, we lose. It's a family support program. It protects almost every child in America if they lose a parent to death or disability. It protects almost 100% of the children in this country. It helps kids, it helps people who lose a spouse, it helps people with disability. It's not just a retirement program. So we need to think about how we talk about some of these things. Because again, if people box us in, then we get defensive and we can't make any progress. So yeah, I'm still at it. It's not done yet, but I'm not going to give up.
At the Federal Reserve, when you made your point that was different than the others who said we're spending way too much money on old people and we're going to go down the drain, and you took the counterpoint, what was the reaction? How did these economists accept that? It seems obvious, but...
Well, what I loved was that Janet Yellen was nodding her head. And she was nodding her head at one of the suggestions that I made. It was one of those situations, I don't know if you've ever been in this, but when you're on a panel and you're the last panelist and somebody earlier in you thinks that what they have to say is the most important and you have a poor facilitator. Mm-hmm. It came to me, we had an hour with the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. I had 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so I said, fine. So I just went, and laid it out. And so one of the things I said, I talked about human capital asset, but I said one of the things, for example, that we need to think about is we need to think about issues and how we're approaching those in a different way. So for example, we have this entire age-in-place community, and they know it's better, we know it's better and healthier and less expensive for older adults to age in communities where they live. It costs less. We have this whole issue of student debt, of people that are dying under these huge student loan debts. Why can't we take a clue from Spain and from some of the other countries, where in Spain, young people who agree to home share or help older adults stay in their own home get free university tuition. Now in this country, we could do something to reduce student debt if a young person, like in Teach for America, agrees to either in a community help older adults stay in place, if they agree to home share, whatever it is, and reduce that student debt. And so the Urban Institute, when I put that idea forward, started to work with it and came up with a scheme for how that might work. So that's what I was telling the Federal Reserve, is you've got to think outside the box, like marrying student debt with the ability for people to age in place. And they had just been discussing student debt and what they were going to be able to do about it, so they were intrigued with that idea. So I think it's helped in terms of some of the language there, or at least they're trying to.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to live and work in South Korea quite a bit over my life. And there, the culture and the tradition is that the oldest son is responsible for the parents and the younger siblings in terms of finance, in terms of their lifestyle, and in some cases brings the family, the parents into the home. They take care of the children, so on and so forth. So in all these discussion you've had, it's organizations, but I think the family also has a great responsibility to focus on that intergenerationalism and support the parents or grandparents and older adults. I think first and foremost, not the government, not NGOs, but it's the family that has to do this? I'd like your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think it's a combination. I think that the family is the first line of defense. This was actually the 20th anniversary of the International Year of the Family in May, and I did a background paper for the UN on intergenerational solidarity and what that means for families and how to support intergenerational solidarity in families, because I think it's really, really important. So the family is critical, and it varies around the world in terms of the strength. What I think is interesting in some of the Asian communities is that they're starting to deal more with some of what we've been facing for a number of years, which is longer commutes, things that are tearing at families, and so they're grappling with how to adjust to those kinds of things. I do think it's the family, but I think the family, as the UN said back in, I think it was 1954, the family is a fundamental building block of society and deserves the support and the respect of the state and its citizens. So I think there is a role for NGOs and for the government to support families. But you're right, it's the same reason that in our work with grandparents raising grandchildren, we have a new partnership with the adoption community and the foster care community. It's called Advocates for Families First, because every child should be in a family, if it's at all possible. You should find a relative, you should find some family for them, because family is fundamental. So I agree, I think family is critical.
Donna, one question from
the
screen. Yes.
Okay. Hi, Screen.
Brent Green is asking, what additional steps can be taken to promote the intergenerational economic opportunities of industries focused on the business of aging?
What intergenerational opportunities can we?
To promote the intergenerational economic opportunities.
Well, I'm not sure if this is quite what he had in mind, but one of the things that we talk about is the importance of looking at intergenerational communities as an economic development tool. Because when you think about a community, when businesses are thinking about where they locate, they know they have employees, and those employees have children, they have aging parents most likely. So if you show that you're a community that has services and engagements for people across the lifespan, it makes it a much more appealing community. Now, when you think about the aging in place industry, which might be a part of what I was asking about, I'm always advocating for, okay, if we're talking about technology, who's going to teach that technology? Who's going to support that technology? Who are they going to talk to on that technology? So there's very much an intergenerational role in technology and aging in place and in supporting older adults.
It sounds like maybe technology companies could do well to hire young people to help convert older people to their products, to their devices.
There are a number of programs that are based around technology, and it's one of those. It's a wonderful and a very important area that really does and can connect the generations, because it helps young people know that they have a skill that they can teach, that they can share. But it's also, for example, one of the big things that's going on with technology now is the move from landline to mobile, and so they're getting rid of a lot of the industry is getting rid of copper wires, and older adults are resistant to giving up a landline, and so it's young people teaching older adults about what they can do with a cell phone, how they can use that cell phone, how it can be helpful. So there's a lot of roles for younger people in helping with transitions, and technology is really important. Older adults oftentimes, they're the fastest ones going on Facebook, they're the fastest ones going online because they want to see pictures of their grandkids, they want to be engaged. There's some really great stuff that's happening.
Donna, I'm intrigued by the Swampscott, Massachusetts story that you told, and there was a sense of urgency there because both the younger crowd and the older crowd were faced with a decision which led eventually to this great compromise. I'm curious if you're seeing other examples of elementary schools or high schools or sites of the more intensive uses of some of the intergenerational activities that you were mentioning.
We're starting to see some of that. I would like to see a lot more. But we have examples now of senior centers that are located in junior highs. I think the charter school area is interesting. Like there's the Intergenerational Charter School in Cleveland, Ohio. And they've been going for quite some time. They've been rated one of the top charter schools in America. And what they're doing now is they're actually expanding and they're becoming part of a campus that has older adult living, a hospital, a boys club, and boys and girls club, and then the intergenerational school. But we've seen some of that I think we need to see more of is where we're actually building the facilities and creating that space together. Somewhat of a similar example I would give would be Maricopa County in Arizona, where they no longer build senior centers and single-age facilities. They build multi-generational centers or intergenerational centers. And so it's that commitment from a community that they're going to use their resources, and they can't afford to staff and to run these separate facilities. And so since schools, whether it's engaging older adults in after-school activities or before-school activities, whether it's actually building the senior center or providing that service on site, I think is really something that I hope we're going to see more of. But it's going to take good design. And we know some good design.
When you go out into the international area and work, is there anything that our society can bring to the international table that is worthy of emulation? Or are we just really, disconnected from it and need help?
I think it's really interesting, Dennis, because I was fortunate to, several years ago, be at the launch of the Japan Intergenerational Unity Network. And the reason that they brought us and a number of people in is because they felt like they were behind us, lagging behind us in about 10 or 20 years in terms of care of older adults. Because again, culturally, older adults are taken care of by the family, but the family was starting to experience a lot of stresses, and yet they also then had to deal with the fact that it culturally was not acceptable that they weren't able to take care of their parents. So what they were trying to do is look at how could they provide supports and care and help support the family. So in some areas, in some ways, we've been ahead, but then when for example, we were doing some consulting work with the UK as they were launching their Beth Johnson Center for Intergenerational Practices in the UK, and they came over and were starting to learn a little bit from us. And then, a couple years later, I was having breakfast with Alan Hatton-Yo, who headed the foundation, and he said, Donna, we came over here to learn from you, and now we're doing it so much better. And I think, to me, that's a learning community, because I love learning from them. We may have helped to seed the work, but they're doing it in ways that are phenomenal, and it's wonderful to be able to keep that international community going and learning. So I think that there's a lot. I think that one of the areas that concerns me are some of the countries that are concerned about the changing demographics, and they're starting to take more of a punitive approach. For example, in India several years ago, they passed a Supportive Parents Act, where if you don't provide financial support for your parents, you can be jailed and fined. And they're finding, can you imagine? It's not working. And it's not working because the parents don't want to bring charges against their children, but usually the reason the children aren't providing support is because they don't have it. And if you throw them in jail, they not only can't support their parents, they can't support their children. So to me, our Social Security system is a lot better of an option than a Supportive Parents Act. Singapore actually toned theirs down because they found it was harming family bonds, and they were very concerned about it. So I think some of what we do, while it needs to be tweaked, is a better scheme, but there are things that we need to learn. And I think we learned so much. I'm intrigued with right now, Wales is committed to becoming the first country for all ages. And so they have a dedicated funding stream, dedicated staff that are making sure that everything in Wales is done and viewed with an intergenerational lens.
All right, thank you very much. It's great to have you all the way from Washington, D.C. to Kansas, where we're streaming live back to Washington, D.C. Isn't that ironic? Thanks so much.